Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Beth, and I recently finished reading Of Human Bondage by William Somerset Maugham. This book was published in 1915, so over 100 years ago, and is about 662 pages long. So, fair warning, I have tried reading this book before. I got about 100 pages in, and I was enjoying it, but I fell into a reading slump. I'm I'm going to say this. The novel is relatively slow. It's definitely a novel in which it's very introspective about the themes of life and not a lot happens. I couldn't tell you even now, even though I just finished reading the book earlier today, I couldn't tell you many specific plot points of the book, just the general themes. Mostly I believe it's this way because it is autofiction. William Somerset, his life is so similar to this novel that it can kind of be transferred over into reading much more like somebody's diary. Innermost thoughts is very introspective. And so, with that said, I guess I'll explain that the general premise of this novel. You have Philip, who was orphaned at an early age and went to live with his vicar uncle and aunt who are considerably older. He did not have much paternal love through that relationship and was sent away to school. And I think this is mostly because he was a cripple. So he had a club foot. So he always kind of felt removed from everybody else. He was always very, very aware of his inability to do things that other children enjoyed. But he loved to read and just had this kind of affinity for art and culture. And he carried that through him throughout his life. And I think what you can really see throughout this novel is the fact, and I think it's funny because even though there are so many outdated themes in this novel, his general approach to life seems really, I would say, important for this time because you often see people stressing about how old they are and how much they need to get done in their lives, and you have somebody like Philip, our main character, who's struggling to find a profession and took 2 years off on trying to earn his medical diploma because of poverty, because he couldn't support himself. And you definitely see that it isn't until his early 30s that he finally finds himself a career and decides that, this is what he's going to do with his life, so to speak. There's not much to say spoiler wise, mostly because it's not a plot driven novel. I think you read this book for the themes in which it expresses. There are some beautiful passages in this book, which I took pictures of and I reread because they definitely make you ponder upon your existence. There's a running motif throughout the novel about the Persian rug and how that relates to the meaning of life. Um, and I think that it's just, even though some themes very outdated, a little misogynist at times, but you still love the characters, which is quite funny to say, but you have to look at it through a lens of a completely different time period. This is not the same world that we live in now. This was written in the early 20th century, but with somebody that grew up in the 19th century. So you have these Victorian ideals, and it's another thing that really interested me is somebody that lived during this time period that isn't that long ago. And yet I find that the way he was raised, it almost reads not medieval, but so removed from where we are today. It almost felt like reading a Harry Potter novel because I couldn't understand that that was the world that he lived in. It was also interesting that he was subsiding off of basically bonds and money that was left behind from his parents, and he was trying to live off of that while going to school. And it was interesting because the way that people were spoken about in this novel is in terms of how much they get per year just based off of their property holdings or bonds. So they have this income every year just to spend. And it kind of blew my mind that that was up until very recently, obviously, that was a common fact of life. People just commonly lived like that, which I'm not sure how that speaks about our time period, but it was interesting because it did carry him through most of his schooling until he fell into poverty because he made a bad stock choice, essentially. Don't play with the stock exchange, especially if you're going to put all your money down. I'm sorry if that's a spoiler, but the book is over 100 years old and has multiple motion pictures towards it. I do think that it's interesting the way that Somerset approaches love, because there's a main love interest throughout this whole novel. Her name's Mildred, and she abuses this poor boy. Just he's constantly pining after her and giving her everything she could have asked, but at the same time, you listen to his internal monologue. He doesn't think she's pretty. And he finds her vulgar, he finds her vapid, he doesn't respect her opinions, he hates talking to her, and yet he wants to do everything for her, and he always wants to be around her, and he has this yearning to have sexual relations with this woman, and thinks that maybe that will solve it. And he never has sexual relations with this woman, which I feel kind of terrible for him, but because she, time and time again, she chooses other people over him and foots him with the bill, literally and figuratively. And in the end, you could say she got her justice, but it obviously didn't make him happy. You find throughout this novel that maybe, I remember when I first read this book, I thought he was really vile. When I first read the first 150 pages, I thought he was really vile, really selfish. I think that he thought the worst of people, and he was constantly kicking people down, but I think that was also due to my youth, because as I've aged, I was able to read this book and look back upon it as how it compared to what I thought when I was his age. His different ages, of course. And just thinking about how he was just a kid. Of course he's gonna be selfish. Not to put it, obviously there are outliers, but he really learns how to be a good person, and he struggles with these moral qualms. And it's also interesting to see in this book, he wants to be a good person not because of the church. He is an atheist. By the end of this novel, he does not believe in God. He believes that he should be morally correct just because, I think because it makes him feel good. Because he thinks about, there is a moment in the novel, he thinks about murdering his uncle because he's so destitute. And he doesn't do it because he says, I couldn't live with myself. Why would I even think about doing that? How could I have even thought of that? And you do see that good people can think of terrible things, but as long as they don't act upon it, who's to say who's right and who's wrong, I guess one would say. Even though he doesn't believe in God, he's always doing the right thing. And he's always overthinking everything. I think I loved the pacing of his thoughts. There's this kind of almost anxiety like, or panic quality to a lot of what he was thinking about, and how one thought induces another thought and it keeps rolling and rolling until he himself is in a panic. And I do think that if you read through the whole novel, you are rewarded in the end. Even though I do believe that the romantic conquest in this book is really interesting to me, because in the end he ends up with somebody he does not love, but he enjoys her company. And I think that speaks a lot to the author during this time period, because he was a homosexual, and 2 years after the publication of this book, he married a woman and had a child with her. So he settled for somebody he did not love because it was essentially expected of him, so that he could have this life that he wanted, the family life, so to speak. And I just found it really interesting. I think that if you have the time and the patience, read this book, but fair warning, it's a very slow book, to say the least. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed my review, and have a good one.